Afternoon, ladies and gents. We're on the module DD316 Modern Political Ideas, page 56, chapter 3 Generators of Ideas, Overuse of Evidence Based Policy Ideas, or recognisable concepts like liberty or equality, as have normally been presented in left or right terms. The so-called post-truth era is said to be characterized by a period where trust has broken down between the political class and other elites, and experts and the broader public. That has meant that traditional politics parties and ideologies no longer have the same appeal they once had. There have been more specific reasons for this, such as the election of President Trump in the USA 2016, but it also reflects the impact of technological changes which have enabled social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter to have a more central role. Western liberal democracies have traditionally been rooted in institutions which gain their authority from vertical forms or transparency in which representatives are accountable to the public and their powers are constrained by long established institutional functions and convention. The new media presents a challenge to this traditional authority if used in particular ways. And Matthew D. Anconas, 2017, has argued that to some degree liberal democracy has not kept up with these changes. The era of post truth presents specific challenges to the ways in which political ideas have traditionally been organized through ideological lenses. Political ideas have become more fluid, less based on conviction, and more malleable. Post truth also presents a challenge to the authority of political commentators and journalists who write about politics and whose paramount focus has been the search for truth. The notion of a citizen journalist, the blogger, has already enabled the situation where anyone can now write for the public realm. The debates opened up about post truth arguably take this a stage further, where experts are presented as an elite who offer just one narrative of how things should be. Thus, post truth suggests that the battle of political ideas it may in effect become a battle of narratives. If you look at the conclusion, in post truth also has implications for the future of liberal democracy, then it also needs to be reorganised that populism is not itself a new phenomenon. Tom Paine could see as a populist of an earlier era, at least in the way he sought support and depicted his opponents. Populists were the main beneficiaries of the tumultuous events of 2016, and populism has helped to illustrate wider changes in the way political ideas are generated and disseminated, as well as their content. Populism has also questioned the role of elites, which may have far-reaching significance for the ways in which institutions of representative democracy are currently constituted. As this chapter has suggested, the scope for new generators of ideas is now vast and likely to expand further. Chapter 4: The State. What is it and what is it for? In the introduction, the state is one of the most central institutions in both the study and practice of politics and is the focus of some of the most long standing debates in political theory. The word state can often be taken to mean something akin to country, as when we talk of the states of the world or the state of Ireland. However, in exploring what the state is and what it's for, we're focusing more on the idea of the state as an institution of rule, governing over a particular territory and people. As such, the state is fundamental to creating political orders in societies. The form that this political order takes varies, and there are many different kinds of state in existence, ranging from liberal democratic to authoritarian to monarchical, or even combinations of these. As an institution of rule, the state is everywhere in our lives, from our birth unto our death, playing a role in marriage, education, health, our livelihoods, incomes, and property, and war, defence, and diplomacy. As such, pretty much all other political parties' ideas you will encounter in this module, whether we are talking about democracy, rights, citizenship, reform, or revolution, will in some way relate to the state and many debates over its proper role and functions. Yet, though we will talk of the state as a thing, implying a single body or organisation, it is in fact much harder to pin down. Though you will no doubt be able to think of innumerable ways in which we come into contact with the state or hear news and commentary about it in our daily lives, more often than not, this is with regard to particular agents or agencies of the state. Persons or organisations acting on behalf of the state, carrying out particular state functions. As a result, the state has been described as a structured institutional ensemble of the organisations and personal. Marx, 1894, citing White, 2006, as something consisted of more than the sum of its parts. This chapter will explore some key ideas about what that something is, why states exist, and what role states play in society. The chapter proceeds as follows. First, given that the state is fundamentally creating political orders in societies, I will explore briefly what is meant by political order and the functions that state serves with political order. Second, we recognizing that essential foundation for political order is control of violence within society. Section 2, I'll look at ideas about relationship between states, violence and order, in particular in the work of the philosopher and political theorist Thomas Hobbes. Third, I will assess what makes states legitimate and how this relates to the idea of states as being sovereign, as possessing a right to rule. The discussion touched on the question of why should we have an obligation to obey the state, if the mere fact the states create order enough to earn our obedience, or there are other considerations we need to take into account. To societies and political order. Human beings have always lived in societies, that is, in social groups, that are ordered in more or less elaborate ways. A central part of this social order or society is what might be termed its political dimension or its political order. This political order varies considerably in different societies and over history, but arguably contains three fundamental elements common to all. The means by which society arises and upholds collectivity, binding decisions, the means by which society distinguishes between those who are not members of the society, typically treating insiders and outsiders differently, the ways in which a given society manages its interaction with the outside, in Bromley and Brown 2004 and Moseberg 2000. Let me elaborate on those points a little. There are many different ways to define politics. However, defining politics as a means by which we arrive at a collectively binding decision is both broad and flexible. Indeed, by this definition, the scope of politics is potentially limitless. It can apply to a huge variety of scales, from the politics of whole societies to regional, village office, or even family politics. It can also encompass a range of activities, including some of the most common ideas of what politics is. The pursuit of power or the pursuit of the good life, or how resources or power are distributed. The notion of collectivity binding rules may itself be very overt and formalised in particular contexts, or less institutionalised, informal or tactic arrangements. And the subject matter, the issues of what is political, is unlimited because the principle anything can be the subject of collective decision making. The second and third points are above are linked. The societies within which collective decision making, i.e., politics, operates have always been multiple. Note that above I said that humans have always lived in social groups. The plural is important. There has never been a single human society, but always multiple societies. The second and third components of political order follow from this. First, specifying with the collective of people is. who is included in the collective decision making and to whom those decisions apply, means identifying who is and isn't seen as part of that society. Most societies in human history have had some means of making this distinction. Typically, it comes with sets of roles and practices, rights or duties that apply differently depending on whether someone is a member of that society or not. Second, the fact that has always been a multiplicity of societies means that interaction with other societies, whether they are neighbouring ones or greater distance, are managed or regulated in some way. The diplomacy, in a broader sense, has been an institutionalized feature of just every type or case or society, mentioned in Roseberg 2006. This definition of politics was very broad.
Hello, Moto.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello there. Is it? Hi.
Hi, can I speak to Mr. Johnson?
Is this important, mate? Yeah? No? It is what might be termed as general abstraction, an attempt to set out what is common to politics without identifying a particular form that politics might take or scope it might have in any given society or at any particular moment in history. Marx, 1973. Pause here and consider this attempt to give a general definition of the political dimension of social order. Can you think of examples of what you would regard as political that fit within this definition? Do you think its needs modifying or can be changed or extended in some way? Whatever your answer to those questions, it is the contention here, and is one shared by most ideas about the state, that the state has a central role in all three of these areas of political order. Isn't to say that all politics is about states. As indicated above, politics can occur in a huge array of social locations. Rather, it is that most examples of existing states one can think of are intimately bound up by all three of these areas of politics: the making and upholding of collective rules, the regulation of who is and is not considered a member of that society, and the management of relations with other external coexisting societies. In most of the rest of this chapter, my focus is going to be on the first and arguably the most general of these political functions, the state's role in making and uploading and collectively binding rules. The second, questions of membership of society or citizenship, is the focus of Block 3, while the third, relations with other societies, is the core subject matter of international relations. And our focus in this module is mainly on modern state. That is a form of statehood that, at its broadcast, traces origins back to the 17th century, Europe, and spread. In that interactive process throughout Europe and the rest of the world from the late 18th century onwards. It's important to note that, however, the extent to which any given society has an identifiable organizational institution, one can call a state varies hugely, both over history and geography. There are some historical examples of hunter-gatherer groups and of what anthropologists have termed acephalous, literally headless, stateless societies where political functions are not easily democrated. From everyday practice, survival, and ritual. This is mentioned in Bazan and Little, 2000, and Van der Pigel, 2007. But certainly since the advent of settled agriculture in 10 to 6000 BCE, states or practices and institutions fulfilling state-like functions have been evident at the central focus of political order, most known societies. These range from kinship-based societies or tribes to city-states, monarchies, and empires of various kinds, as well as the varied manifestations of modern states. As with many approaches to understanding the state, this chapter will focus on particularly the role of the state in limiting disorder and controlling the use of violence. In the next section, I will explore why this particular function is so central, drawing ideas of Thomas Hobbes and Max Weber. In the following sections, I will explore what makes states legitimate and what is meant when we say the state are sovereign in fulfilling these roles. States' violence and coordination. The control of violence is cited by many writers as core function of states. One of the most well-known definitions of the modern state comes from the German sociologist Max Weber, who defined it as follows. A ruling organisation will be called political insofar as its existence and order is continuously safeguarded with a given territory ever by the threat and application of physical force of part of the administrative staff. A compulsory political organisation with continuous operation will be called a state insofar as its administrative staff successfully lay claims to the monopoly of the legitimate use of force in enforcement of its rules. We will come back to some crucial aspects of this definition later in this chapter, but for now, let's note that for Weber, a state rules over a given territory, and its core function is to exercise monopoly over the use of force or violence in society. Part of the state's function, as we have noted, is to uphold collectivity by decisions, but the idea actually contains within the two distinct kinds of rules of actions. On the one hand, there are rules of which regulate social life, everything from company and employment law regulations over private and family life to media regulation, an enormous array of activities governed by rules that the state makes and seeks to uphold. These regulated rules are the focus of lawmaking in parliaments and other legislative bodies and the subject of much everyday political debate. They can also have a profound effect on people's welfare. Indeed, the distributional effects of state actions help to determine how resources are divided up within society. In Harold Laswell's famous phrase, who gets what, when and how? For example, choices about how the economy is regulated different after distributions of income and wealth. Education policies can enable or limit social mobility, and laws governing contracts and property rights help to establish the necessary framework for market economies to work. But, depending on how they are framed, can also concentrate wealth or help to distribute it more widely. Such effects might be deliberate aim of policy, or maybe indirect or unforeseen. As a result, some aspects of everyday political debate focus on the rights or wrongs of particular policy choices. However, at a more general level, there are debates about how extensive such state regulations should be as a whole, questioning what areas of social and economic life it is right to have state regulation. However, the debate over making, reforming and removing such regulative rules is a core part of playing the game of politics. The state also has a role in establishing and uploading the very game itself. This is sometimes referred to as its constitutive role of bringing the game of politics into being in the first place by establishing a political order and all that goes with it. The territory and people over which the state rules and the state's claim to right to rule or its sovereignty. We can see this in section 4. The difference between regulative and constitutive rules can be illustrated by reference to a chess game mentioned in Searle 1995. If the moves or counter moves on the chessboard are acting regulative rules, the actual game itself requires constitutive rules in order to exist. These constitutive rules include the characteristics of chessboard, the identities of the different chess pieces, king, knight, pawn, etc., and how they can move. They are constitutive rules because they constitute the game of chess. They bring it into being. The key thing to note at this stage is that the state's claim to control or violence is fundamental to both regulative and constitutive sides of the state. To perform its regulative role governing society activity, the state ultimately relies on physical force, that is, the use of police, security forces, and armed forces to apply the laws or rules of any given society. To achieve the constitutional role, the state has to bring a political order within which such a social activity can occur in the first place. Fundamental to this constitutive role of the state are rules regulating the use of physical force in society. Simon Bromley has argued that the collectivity binding rules about the use of force play a basic and defining role of political life, or at least in the working class of political order. The reason for this, he argues, is to do with the effect of using physical force on a person's social agency, the ability to act. The difference of the force is basic because the social use of force is quite different from the exercise of power. It denies the agent's ability to act, thereby treating the agent as literally a merely physical object. Force constrains or destroys agency in a way that no other source of social power seeks to do. In all other cases, the exercise of social power always presupposes a capacity for agency, however limited, on the part of its subordinate targets. A political actor's agency refers in part to their freedom to act purposefully within the constraints of their position in society. Other methods of exercising political power or other means by which conflicts on interest can be resolved by persuasion, reciprocity, deal making, or comprehensive incentives, and so forth, leave the agent or person who some means or ability to exercise choices, some degree of freedom of action, even those choices are highly constrained in Right 2006. Using violence actually removes this space entirely and physically takes control of the body of the person. To illustrate this point, think of the difference between attempts by authorities to persuade business people running a company to operate in a particular way according to the law in matters of financial fraud, say, by publicising regulation codes of best practice, and the physical arrest, seizure, and imprisonment of persons thought to be breaking such a law. In the first instance, the company or person makes a choice whether to obey or not, while in the latter case, the freedom of action is removed. However, in every person in a society could act in a way that and resort to physical force to resolve social conflicts or disagreements of any kind. Would any social order be possible at all? In focusing this definition of the state on the state seeking to have monopoly or sole control on the use of violence. Weber was in fact continuing a long line of Western thinking on the state going back to at least to Thomas Hobbes. It was Hobbes' argument that a state was needed most fundamentally in order to resolve the problems arising from the use of force in society. Thomas Hobbes, 1588 1679, is one of the most famous political philosophers of all time, and his books, Leviathan Hobbes.
Hello, Moto.
Hello there. Hello.
Yeah, hi, very good afternoon, Mr. Justin. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Mr. Whoever you are. Where are you calling from, please?
Yeah, Mr. Justin, you are speaking with Farhan, and I'm the senior advisor. And I hope you remember we had a vote with you regarding the damages work in the past time.
There's a touchstone debates on political order of Hobbes in the concept of civil wars in England, generally dated in 1642 to 1640, but also world travel in Europe, which in that time were undergoing political upheavals associated with the 30 Years' War, which ended in 1648. In introducing Hobbes' account, I was to focus on the core of this argument about why people will seek to create a sovereign state or levian with authority over them, and will not therefore be explaining of many other aspects of Hobbes' work. In Livian, Hobbes seeks to explain political obligation why people would limit their freedom by agreeing to allow a state to rule over them. Hobbes begins by painting a picture of what life would be like where there are no state and no control of people's use of violence, without a power to keep them in awe. He suggests there would be where every man against every man. Hobbes argued that where men live without other security, then what their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them all with all. Then all other aspects of civilized life, trade, building, culture, arts, science, travel, become impossible. In a famous passage, he claims. In such condition, there is no place for industry because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodities building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of this face, the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which it worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death and life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Pause here and ensure that you do not sense Hobbes' argument about the consequences of not having a state.